Dainty Wrists is a song I started writing a few years ago but have only recently finished. In this song you've got a speaker who's a young man, and he's speaking about a young woman who's survived a suicide attempt. Exactly who he is isn't essential, exactly who she is isn't essential, how they're related to each other, if they even know each other at all, none of that is hugely relevant to the song. It's all left unexplained. But in this song, the speaker, the young man, has, in one way or another, come to know of this young woman's suicide attempt, and he's addressing his words to her, although in the abstract, in my mind, the speaker isn't actually intending her to hear any of what he's saying, but he's speaking to her in his imagination. I use the first line to set the scene and put us exactly into this young woman's position, physically in the fact that she's lying on the bathroom floor, but then also setting the tone emotionally, because why would she be on the bathroom floor? Then I'm describing her as being in a whole new space. Now presumably she has been in this bathroom before, but perhaps she hasn't been lying on its floor in the way that she is now. But I'm also using the word space as in headspace. I'm talking about her mindset. She's in a new space, she's in uncharted territory. Then a little woozy, very weak. This is highlighting that something's up. She's not in her normal state of consciousness, something's not right. Her state of consciousness is affected for some reason. Then the next three lines are describing what she's seeing, what her mind's focusing on as she's lying there. To jump ahead, the carmine bracelet, where carmine is a kind of red pigment. Carmine bracelet is the blood that is coming from her wrists, because it's the bracelet that she made. She has slit her wrists and the blood is flowing, and she's noticing how her breath is keeping a similar rhythm to the pulse of the blood that is flowing. And at the end there, I've used the word made, and I've used that word deliberately. I've deliberately gone for something generic and understated, because the vagueness and understatedness of that word, I feel represents that this thing is difficult to talk about in more precise language. These lyrics don't rhyme, you'll see that throughout the whole song, but I have tried to bind this first verse together aesthetically with some assonance. So on the second, fourth and sixth lines, you've got the words space, rate and made, the assonance of that vowel sound A, and then you've also, less importantly, got strangely and bracelet too. And then you've got some alliteration with woozy and weak, which just gives some aesthetic structure to pull it together. The next verse then tells us more about the situation that she's in. So from the first verse, we learnt that she has slit her wrists. Now what we're told is that in addition to that, she has also taken some pills. An anodyne is an archaic word for a painkiller. So she hasn't just slit her wrist, she's also taken a bunch of painkillers, hence why it's a doubled up suicide attempt. She slit her wrist and she's doubled that up by also taking some pills. But doubled up also has a double meaning, as in the expression doubled up in pain. So there's a deliberate perverse irony there, that she's taken painkillers but she's potentially causing herself pain. Now maybe that's because the painkillers are ineffectual, maybe the pain she's in isn't the kind of pain that painkillers treat, or maybe they are actually a physical source of pain because of her body's reaction to taking as many pills as she had. Oh, it must be bad, for how many did you take? It's like someone else looking at the scene and realising the emotional pain that she may have been known to be in for some time. We suddenly see how serious that is, because if she's prepared to slit her wrists and take a bunch of pills, then yeah, there really must be a problem here. So the next detail that I've included is that she'd forgotten to lace the lock, where by lace the lock what I had in mind there was a bolt lock of the kind that I'll put on screen now. And in those locks you can see that there's that central rod that gets threaded through that outer loop. So by lace the lock, that was just a sort of poetic way of describing the lock being properly bolted, the bolt being moved across. But because she forgot to lock the door, that was a crucial reason why she was able to be found in time. And then this verse ends with a rhetorical question of posing what state she might have been found in had the door been locked and had it been harder to get to her in time. Then we have the first chorus, and as I said at the start, the image in my head is that this is a young woman. To me, she's probably still a teenager, and I'm picturing her still living at home with her parents. And this chorus is recounting a moment where she's been found. And in my head, it's not essential, but in my head, she's being found by her mother. And her mother has come into the bathroom, which was not locked. She's seen her daughter lying there on the floor, definitely alive, but lying motionless, wrists cut, bleeding, blood on the floor, presumably some kind of bottle of pills next to her, empty or nearly empty, and that is understandably a horrific sight. But at the same time as being extremely shocked and distressed by the situation, there's also a sense from her instinctive initial survey of the scene that her daughter isn't imminently at risk of death. She's likely rescuable. She's not about to be lost. And as a result, what I've imagined coming out of her mother's mouth at that moment is a very afraid sort of anger. That kind of anger that can happen when you really care about someone, but they've done something to risk their own safety, and you end up being really angry at them for what they've done. And it's that afraid kind of anger where she scolds her daughter for having done what she's done, particularly noting the pills and saying that they could have potentially given her brain damage, and that might have been a fate worse than death. And then in the third line, she's also remarking with sorrow on the cuts to her daughter's wrists, which will probably leave scars and leave a permanent reminder of this suicide attempt, which must be a very painful reminder and a very guilt-inducing reminder to anyone who's known someone who's attempted suicide. So that is the outline of the situation with this young woman and her suicide attempt. We don't know her backstory, but her life has led her to this point of attempting suicide, but that attempt has been unsuccessful. But now is the time to tell you what this song is really about. And it's not so much about this young woman and her suicide attempt. It's not even specifically about suicide. Really, the song is about empathy and the choice between being empathetic or being cold-hearted. And the main subject of this song is actually the character of the person singing. When writing these lyrics, I really tried to make subtext, the star player of the story. So at this point, let's go back to the start of the lyrics and see what else is going on. Because at the same time as setting the scene and giving enough information to try to explain what's happening, I also tried to choose words that would reveal something about the person saying them. And his view is that her so-called suicide attempt wasn't a genuine suicide attempt. He's accusing her of being melodramatic and doing it for attention without any real true intention of killing herself, which is a very harsh, unsympathetic position to take, and we as the audience are not meant to agree with his view. But let's go back to the start. On your side, lying on the bathroom tiles. So, of course, on your side doesn't just have to denote a physical position. It can also indicate affiliation, agreement, support. If you're on someone's side, you're there for them, you're there to support them, you're there to defend them, you're looking out for their best interests. But here, crucially, the speaker does not say, "I am on your side." It's just the phrase "on your side" hanging there, so he's not saying that he's on her side. And the very next word is lying, which we all know has a double meaning. She's not just physically lying on the floor, but he's also saying that she's being dishonest. What she's doing is a kind of performance. This isn't a truthful attempt at suicide. She hasn't truthfully attempted to take her life. It's just an act. Then he also describes her as very weak, which earlier we saw was a legitimate way of describing her state of consciousness, but it can also be another accusation, a criticism of her character. She's weak. Then, with some sarcasm, he is drawing attention to the fact that her breath and her pulse are holding an even rate. Now, I don't know in practice how this would work if you've slit your wrists and you're bleeding out. And I don't know what the effect on the body is if you've taken a painkiller related overdose. But the accusation here is that if you're dying, your pulse might be slowing down, your breath might be getting weaker, and he's saying that it's strange how that isn't happening. Her breath seems just as level and as strong as it was, her pulse is keeping up a steady rhythm, so she's not really dying or drawing closer to death. So what she's done isn't really killing her, again with the accusation that she never really intended to. And then he continues in a tone which could be taken as somewhat belittling. Her pulse is going swimming, which potentially sounds frivolous and light-hearted. He's describing the slits on her wrists as a bracelet, like she's ornamenting herself with something, wearing a piece of jewellery, rather than doing something serious. And again, coming back to the word made, calls to mind the expression, "look at the mess you made." It's carrying that accusation that this is her own fault, this is her own doing, it's a mess of her own making. The next verse is riddled with sarcasm. I come back to this word anodyne. Yes, it's an old word for something that relieves pain, but it can also mean something that is played overly safe, that is bland, vanilla, something that is frankly offensively inoffensive. And so using that word in the context of discussing her suicide attempt is to belittle it, is to say that it was a feeble attempt with no real bite behind it. Oh, it must be bad. That can be said in a genuine way, but it can also be said sarcastically. Oh, it must be bad. And then also sarcastically, he says she forgot to lock the door, because can she think what state she might have been found in? Well, potentially that's a rhetorical question, or it's one with an answer, and the answer is yes. she did think about it. She planned this out. She deliberately left the door unlocked so that she could be found. And then lace the lock. By lace the lock, I'm not just referring to locking the door, I'm also referring to poison. A drink can be laced with poison, and by lock, I'm referencing hemlock, which is a poisonous type of plant, which historically was infused into a drink. So if she's forgotten to lace the lock, then she's forgotten to put the poison in the poison drink. So it's not really a poison drink at all, and it's not going to have any effect. In the chorus then too, of course there's the word fool in the first line, drawing attention to the idea that her actions are unwise. Then the phrase deed to your hand, which calls to mind the expression when something is ready to hand, i.e. it's there to be used at will. And this is feeding into a running theme in the background of the song, that pain and suffering is something that people can really derive a genuine respect from, and any of us can find ourselves showing respect to people who have been through real suffering in their lives. And it's a strange thing that simply having suffered something serious can earn you a kind of respect. And again, the accusation here that's being made by the speaker against this young woman is that this suicide attempt is something that she's using to gain respect for herself, to say, look how serious my struggles have been. And in the final line, the word unfailing is ironic, given that this was a failed suicide attempt. And then ending the chorus, we have the phrase, a world of pain, which, when spoken in one tone, could be meant seriously, but I think you can easily imagine how that could be said in a sarcastic way. Moving on to the next verse then, and in light of what I've now explained about my intended focus for this song, it should now be pretty easy to see that we're getting more sarcasm here, with the speaker claiming there's something he doesn't understand, in a style of faux politeness, and asking in this pretense of genuine inquiry whether it's really as difficult as apparently it seems to bleed yourself to death if you really intend it. As the sarcasm and the bitterness becomes more apparent during the course of this verse, it also becomes less subtextual, and in its place something else starts happening in the subtext which reveals more about this character. And my intention here is that what we're learning is that he is clearly in a state of pain. He may have been suffering for a long time, but he has never himself attempted suicide. So while he's making these acerbic remarks about her suicide attempt, there's also a sense in which the questions are genuine. He genuinely doesn't know what it's like to get to that point, and what it would be like, and what choices he would make in that situation. So when he's saying that he doesn't understand, he is saying it pointedly with a very specific intent, but subconsciously you might say he's revealing to us his genuine lack of experience, his lack of knowledge. Behind the front, where he's accusing this young woman of being weak and artificial and attention-seeking, there are things he's really not sure about. He doesn't know for sure how easy or how hard it is to commit suicide, even when you're so unhappy that you don't feel that you want to live anymore. He doesn't know what it takes to push you over the edge. He doesn't know what kind of choices you would make in that situation. Then is it that much of a struggle to go and fill a scarlet bath? Sarcasm, yes, also a genuine question, particularly because you can cut the question in half and read it as, is it that much of a struggle to go? Where go is another understated way of talking about dying, leaving this life, and that's a big question. And when I sang this line, I attempted to hang on the word go before continuing to and fill a scarlet bath to highlight that. I would have thought is a feigned air of ignorance and a yet more accusatory tone, but again reveals that he doesn't know this himself. So he doesn't know exactly what it takes, and the next line may suggest why, if he had decided to and if his mind had stayed sharp. So there's some doubt there as to whether he'd actually go through with it, whether that's stopping himself before actually doing anything, or probably much more terrifying, whether that's starting something and then changing your mind halfway through and regretting it, and God knows what that would feel like. And then the message in this verse is rounded off with his very perfunctory conclusion that it should be a simple matter, right? He would just turn on the tap. If you have genuinely decided to kill yourself, then you'll just do it, right? Why would there be any such thing as a failed suicide attempt if you're genuine about it? Thereby implying that if you do fail in your suicide attempt, that there's something disingenuous about it. And here, turn on the tap is another example of where I'm trying to include some double meaning, because on the one hand, it's a euphemism for slitting your wrists and causing the blood to flow. But on the other hand, it's evoking the idea of turning on the waterworks, i.e. Crying in a deliberate attempt to look for sympathy. The second chorus begins with him asserting a rather grim motto: a man doesn't attempt, he succeeds, i.e. a real man wouldn't attempt suicide, he would succeed. Which serves as his explanation for why he's never attempted suicide, because he's claiming that if at some point he had genuinely decided to kill himself, then he would have gone through with it to the end. There wouldn't be any failed attempts on his part. And so what he's trying to convince himself of, or the world of, is that his suffering is really just as intense as anyone else's, just as intense as this young woman's. It's just that she's expressed her pain with this supposed melodrama of a so-called suicide attempt where she didn't actually have a true intent to kill herself. While equally, he has never come to the point of deciding to kill himself, but the difference between them is that he's not going to create a show of the kind that she has until he's actually made up his mind, at which point, if it came to it, he would do the thing properly. And of course, this is relating to the real world phenomenon, that although diagnoses of depression are more common for women and suicide attempts are more frequently recorded for women, rates of actual suicide are significantly higher for men, which is a phenomenon that has been observed for decades and across multiple countries. And to show that, I'll quickly refer to some evidence here. The links to these will be in the description. So there's this article from the World Health Organization in 2023, which says that 4% of adult men experience depression compared to 6% of adult women. Then I had a look at this survey covering England called the Adult Psychiatric Morbidity Survey. And if you go down to chapter 12, then the findings in there show that women are more likely to report having had suicidal thoughts at some point in their lives, and they're also more likely to report having made a suicide attempt. So here it says 8% of women compared to 5.4% of men. But then if you look at rates of actual suicides, like this data set from the Office for National Statistics in the UK, what you can see is that rates of actual suicide for men are consistently higher. This graph at the top shows the absolute numbers, with the blue line representing male suicides and the orange line representing female, and then this graph underneath showing the rates per 100,000 people. And what you can see is that from 1981 to 2022, the overall trend is a decrease, which is good. But a little more worrying is that the lowest point seems to be at about 2007, and since then there are some fluctuations, but it appears to be creeping up again, which is less good. And then I got some data from the World Health Organization showing male and female suicide rates for each country. And then what I did was highlight in red the ones where the female suicide rate is actually higher than the male one. But as you can see, scrolling through this data, there are very few examples of that, which leaves the overall conclusion being that globally the male suicide rate is higher than the female suicide rate. Back to the lyrics then, and the next line is, "For what stoic would he be that cried for help?" Which is evoking this traditionalist notion that men shouldn't show vulnerability, that they should be tough and stoic, and it says, "What stoic would he be?" where I've deliberately chosen the masculine pronoun over a gender-neutral phrasing like "what stoic would you be?" or "what stoic would one be?" But then that's immediately paired with "that cried for help." What stoic would he be that cried for help, not who cried for help. So it's the impersonal form that I've used there, where impersonal can mean inhuman, more like an object than a person. Stoicism arguably makes you less human. Then, stripe your forearms all you want. That's another allusion to cutting your wrists, potentially referring to the suicide attempt that she's just made, or potentially referring to self-harm even. But then, little girl, it's very derogatory. It's an insulting way of addressing her, and he's trying to expand the difference between himself as a real man, supposedly, and her as this little girl. And as you can tell, the subtlety of his accusations are melting away. They're becoming more overt, more angry, more clearly bitter as the song progresses. And they're being replaced by animosity, open animosity, directed her way. And he's been getting more and more animated as he's thinking about the subject, and he's getting more emotionally worked up. And then we have the final line where the important thing in it is the contrast between the word wealth with the word poor, perhaps implying that she's not so poor and not so deserving of sympathy as she might seem, because she's wormed her way to having a wealth of that sympathy. So those are the lyrics, and the remaining question is, why have I written all this? Why have I devoted a song to such unpleasant sentiments? And of course, you're not meant to agree with what he's saying, you're not meant to be on his side, but still, why air all this? What should be pretty easy to infer is that this character, the speaker in the song, is clearly in pain, he's clearly very unhappy, and he's clearly suffering. Quite probably he wants some acknowledgement. He wants someone to pay him some attention, to show some care for him, but because he hasn't got that, he feels anger. He feels anger at seeing someone else get attention, or someone else doing something that would typically end up with them receiving attention. Because then it's someone else getting something that he has none of, potentially without there being a very clear reason as to why one person should be getting something that he doesn't have, why this young woman would be more deserving of attention than he is. And in a misdirection of those feelings of hurt, he's lashing out at her and belittling her and trying to demote her standing, and thereby instead assert the validity of his pain, of his life experiences. I'll say it again, he is in pain, but crucially, instead of that making him more sympathetic to this young woman, who's obviously also in pain, enough pain to make her slit her wrists and down a bunch of pills, instead of being more sympathetic to that, he's become less sympathetic, seeing her as a rival in pain, a rival for attention, a rival for sympathy. And all over the place, even outside the realm of suicide, I think you can see signs of this a lot, where people's own pain makes them act cruelly to others. Rather than making them more loving, more understanding and more supporting of others, people become cold-hearted and bitter. And this core observation was my motivation for writing the song. This is what the song is truly about. And look, he is not handling the situation in the right way. I hope you'll agree. But it is coming from a position of pain. And that brings us to the crux of the matter, the question of what we should feel towards him. More anger, but now from us at him. Should it be disgust, a cold shoulder, or maybe the challenge to us is to avoid responding in that way and to realise that it is pain that's underpinning all of this. And we can choose to respond with empathy, breaking the cycle of pain that breeds coldness and that causes more pain and breeds more coldness. We can break that cycle. Can you listen to someone say incredibly hurtful things because they're in pain and find it in your heart to respond with compassion? As this song developed, I knew it was turning into something quite dark, where the sentiments that are expressed throughout the song become increasingly more unpleasant. And because the true purpose of this song is so embedded in the subtext, I was, and I still am, slightly concerned about whether it'll come across in the right way, because I do think there's a chance that if this song isn't taken in the right way, it could just upset a listener, which of course is not what I want to do. So for the video, I decided to add some extra words at the start to help frame the song from the outset, and those words were, "Woe to me, jealous of thy pain," by which I meant to draw attention to the fact that he's in a pretty sorry situation. It's what woe to me is referring to. He's feeling angry and frankly envious of someone who's attempted suicide. There are some times in my songwriting where I deliberately want to be ambiguous, but overall this song isn't one where the overall message is meant to be ambiguous. It's heavily reliant on subtext, yes, but ambiguity is not a key driver. Once a listener grasps the subtext and realises that this song is a kind of character study rather than lyrics that are meant to be taken at face value, I don't see there being any particular benefit to ambiguity. Yes, this song forces you to go on a journey to end up at its true message, but once arriving at that true message, it isn't meant to be ambiguous or even provocative or controversial. So hopefully to better frame the song from the outset, I chose to give an early clue, an early indication as to what the real focus of the song is. That being jealous of someone else's pain is not a healthy situation to be in, and it is not the right way of handling your own emotions or of treating other people. So by putting that into words up front, I'm trying to alert the listener to the fact that what they're about to hear isn't meant to be taken at face value, and that they should be looking for meaning behind the words. Also, in an attempt to take the edge off the unpleasantness in this song, I chose to mouth the words "I'm sorry" towards the end of the video. To be honest, I don't know if it's very clear that that's what I'm saying. with my amazing acting abilities, but the character is meant to be silently mouthing the words, "I'm sorry," which gives him a kind of mini redemption arc, in that even in the course of the song, by the end of the song, he has a realization that the way he's been handling his feelings is not okay, and the things that he's been saying is not okay. But this was my attempt to make the character a bit more sympathetic, and therefore perhaps make it more clear that this song is a kind of character study and how the audience is meant to react to it. But I do wonder if this is me kind of chickening out a bit in terms of the journey that the audience is meant to go on in order to figure out for themselves what the song's about and how they're meant to react to it. It is possible that by deliberately showing that the character deserves some sympathy, that maybe I'm making it too easy for the audience by answering the questions for them about how they're meant to respond. You know, I'm telling them how to respond by showing that this character has a change of heart by the end of it all. And that makes it easier for the audience to have empathy for him, because at least he's shown some hint of nicer qualities. But maybe that undermines the point of the song. Maybe I shouldn't be making it easy for the audience to empathise with him. Maybe it's meant to be hard. You'll notice that this explanation video has been very much focusing on the lyrics and the meaning of the song, because that's the main thing I wanted to talk about. But I will just make one note about the production. Now, the production is very amateurish. I really don't know how to do it. I'm not very experienced in music production. But I did make a conscious choice to include some sound effects within the production. In particular, there's some birdsong and there's the sound of a lawnmower. What this is meant to convey is something of the state of awareness that the young woman was in during her suicide attempt, when she's lying there on the bathroom floor. The idea being that she's in a completely novel situation. She's never been in that situation before. It's a very emotional, momentous moment in her life, and this is making her see things very differently. Ordinary things suddenly seem odd. She's noticing things that in day-to-day life you'd normally overlook and ignore. Her senses are weirdly heightened. So these sound effects, the birdsong outside, the sound of a neighbour mowing the lawn, they are creating a juxtaposition between these day-to-day things and the extremely traumatic experience that she's going through. So that's why that's in there. And I will leave you with that. I will leave you with that strange contrast with her lying there in the bathroom, having done what she's done, listening to those sounds outside, lying there, wondering what's to become of her. But still alive. She's still alive. And so is he. And so am I. And so are you. So